Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our podcast. I am extremely pleased to have with us here Salman Zaidi, who's a dear friend of mine. Salman Zaidi is a man of many talents and many interests. He's currently serving as director of the Jinnah Institute. And we are today going to be discussing issues from foreign policy, national security, climate change, and a number of areas that of his interest. Salman, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, and for that bombastic introduction as well.
You're most welcome. So Salman, I think the past year and a half, 2 years have been a proper roller coaster when it comes to Pakistan and regional dynamics, regional developments taking place, and I think they've been discussed ad nauseum. And what I really wanted to discuss with you was how do we take the lessons that we've learned really over the last year, 2 years, with regards to regional developments, and how do we construct a policy going forward, whether it's foreign policy, national security policy, and of course they both go hand in hand. But how is that process undertaken for a country like Pakistan?
So I'm glad that we're discussing a process as opposed to outcomes of foreign policy or national security, because in the search for timelines, perhaps a 2-year timeline or a 5-year timeline depends on what you're looking for. Their tectonic plates have shifted in Pakistan many times. The APS incident brought about a great deal of soul searching in Pakistan and how we redid our foreign policy. Of course, August 5th last year was another such shift whereby we fundamentally altered our relationship in the region, and particularly with India. CPEC may also have been not such a tectonic shift, but this, augured the slow onset of a permanent change in how the region views itself and prosperity, well-being, and fundamentally what we are able to offer our people. I also don't want to sort of take a view of Pakistan as frequently when we look at our policy, we see Pakistan as a monolith. No, we are a very, very contested and cacophonous reality when it comes to policy. Policy is an untidy space to operate in for anybody who has ingress into this domain. The way it is articulated, fashioned, refashioned, is sometimes frequently dependent on external factors.
Mm-hmm.
But many times internally, our soul searching leads to definitive answers, and we have found very many of them. So your question about how do we see the past? I see it frankly as with a degree of happiness, shall I say. And that is not something that we can frequently credit ourselves with. There is, in Pakistan, reasons for happiness are very few and far between, but our policy has moved in the right direction. And as we proceed in a region that is falling apart, that is again conflicted, and there are very many questions about how shall we secure ourselves? Can the region sort of save or create a pathway to success and prosperity? Pakistan offers a rare opportunity and reason for stock taking what has gone right. And I'll stop there. Perhaps we can converse a little more and unpackage all of this. But there's the reasons for feeling any sense of gladness about this is the way our foreign policy has been refashioned, is the way our national security frameworks have come together, is the way we're representing ourselves fundamentally at international forums, is the way our evidence creation and sort of interlocution within has gone right. There are many, many lessons to draw from, but there are many things to feel happy about as well.
No, Salman, thank you so much for that. I think it's very encouraging hearing that because a lot of things don't go right when it comes to developing policies in Pakistan or those things. But seeing that on the foreign policy sphere, seeing developments happening that we've learned from, that we've matured with, that we have internalized and actually come up with responses to effectively. I think that's really encouraging from that perspective. So, Salman, one of the issues, you spoke, and I'm really interested in the word you use, happiness, that you saw coming out from, the lessons that we've learned. And I think a lot to do with that, at least from my perspective, is that we've overcome a lot as well, right? Terrorism has been, probably the issue of the decade for Pakistan, if not for 2 decades, really. In that regard, what do you think Pakistan has really overcome, and how do you think we're going forward?
So there's many things that come to mind, and one thing I'd like to talk about is our de-radicalization program. Now that also runs in a covert space, and that the lessons there are sometimes very tenuous. But we've had good news consistently from our de-radicalization programs, and these go as far back as 15 years. After the SWAT operation, that's when they started.
Absolutely.
And we've heard multiple figures of 80% retention rate, etc. The good thing is that many other countries have been reading into our de-radicalization program and asking us what programs we use, how has it happened, what are the numbers like, etc. The world has struggled with de-rad programs all across the Middle East and in India in particular.
Oh, absolutely. Across
the
the world.
Indians ask us at Track 2 forums, etc., what our templates are looking like. And of course, this is not just dealing with Islamist terror. It is dealing with, how societies go bust, and how to contain violence within. Violence and, the extremisms that apply with deprivations, the extremisms that are developed with a sense of political angst, etc. Now, Pakistan has its share of troubles. FATA is a story. We're still mainstreaming FATA. The legal questions apply, and you know better than anybody else what the deprivations there have been. Balochistan is a story where we consistently have low HDI, etc. All across Pakistan, there are everyday systemic challenges in containing levels of violence. Of course, gender-based violence is a huge story. Now, I don't mean to suggest that Pakistan has it wrong. If we were to start looking at the flip side of the story, then there are many, many things going wrong. At the same time, we have finally perhaps come to terms with putting money where our mouth is. And that's difficult emerging out of a country where, you have had 2 decades actually of consistent war. But while we have fought badly and lost many lives, we have not lost those lessons. This is far ahead of regional countries, India, for example, who have not been able to innovate their sort of counterinsurgency or counter-terror templates as we have. In fact, the Indians see terror in a very different light as we do.
Absolutely.
We have had the benefit of fighting in Afghanistan. Not fighting, not the benefit, not to gloss over this or feel in any sense that, this war should have been avoided, of course. But our ability to fight and fight internally in terms of knowing how the battlefield is shifted to our cities, how we secure our cities, is again far ahead of what perhaps international partners have been able to do. Now, this is just one area. DRAD, our ability to fight and draw lessons. We are also now very cognizant of deprivations that apply internally. Our national security frameworks make good reference. And those papers are being revised. The first policy came up in 2014. Again, in 2018, it's coming up again. And many of those lessons are about how people need to be empowered. And this is actually a fundamental shift in how you turn policies inward and finally start talking about vulnerabilities that apply. We can talk about climate change as well, because that's the major sort of operative lens of how vulnerabilities must be reduced.
No, absolutely. Salman, I really want to get to climate change, but just before that, building upon what you've just said, I think one of the issues you've spoken about deprivations, and you've spoken about a lot of the lessons that we've learned coming out of this, this crucible of terrorism and how it affected Pakistan and the militancy there. When you go forward building policy, what are really the aims of rebuilding a state, a society, a country? What are some of the main issues that we'll be looking at?
Sure. I think it depends who you ask. And I take a development lens to the whole act of rebuilding. And of course, one borrows from the wisdom of national as well as multilateral organizations that are building this. This wisdom emerges from a civil society space.
Absolutely.
Which looks at the whole question of vulnerability, which looks at fundamental freedoms, which looks at equitable citizenships. Whether those standards are being met, of course, a lot is going wrong. And I do not want to pretend at all that the last 5 years or 6 years or even decade has been a boon for fundamental rights. Pakistan is a long way from reporting well on that front. But what I do see now, happily, is an ability of civil society groups, as well as um, to is to be another way to maybe look at it is the variety and diversity of voices that one hears in this space. Not all voices are equal, neither are all of them heard. But Pakistan's ability to put up effective agitation, despite problems that apply with regard to fundamental rights, is a sign of strength. And unlike many other societies, Pakistan still puts up a very good fight when it comes to asking back for fundamental freedoms. We still have it very good in our ability to audit policy. This is another measure of looking at how one rebuilds back.
It certainly is, and I don't think it's something that is so visible, right, publicly. But the fact that we can go back to the drawing board, or that we can go and revise, such fundamental policies, I think is very critical. Just as a lawyer, some of the things that are before me when we're looking at this space is, there are institutions that still keep power in check, or limit abuses of authority that take place, and I think those still function despite all their criticism. But things like the judiciary in Pakistan, which has always remained a very strong proponent of human rights. You've had your odd cases here and there, but I think every country has that. I think that's been a critical bulwark against a lot of the potential abuses that you could see, and that we have seen in the region, especially when you counter this with developments in neighboring countries. In India, what's happening? The Supreme Court is almost complicit now in a lot of the decisions from Ayodhya, Babri, and the two decisions on that. And that is something that is deeply concerning, I think, from a regional lens.
Also, the Supreme Court has played a very effective role in the climate change space. In 2016, if I have my dates right, a farmer put in a case with the Lahore High Court saying that the Constitution actually treats clean environment as a fundamental right.
Absolutely.
And therefore, where is my right? With smog, etc. And that actually led to the creation of the national security, the national climate change policy. The national water policy came up after that. Institutions were created. So the Supreme Court has taken, a very activist role in this respect. A smog commission was set up, etc. That is a far cry from what other countries have been able to do. At the senior most levels of the state, the citizen has access as well as attention. And having moved forward from that, I think the Supreme Court has also taken a very active view of the evidence we have, the evidence that we report internationally, whether it be GSP Plus or at Geneva every year we put in our stats on human rights, on cases of child sexual abuse, etc. We're not doing so well, one has to admit, but there are different centers of power that assist fundamental rights as well as the citizen in making a case for attention and consequence of human lives. This may be creating a new criteria away from HDI, away from the measures of traditional entitlements. Human consequence is perhaps a very abstract way to put what our citizens are able to achieve. But it connects with the idea of vulnerabilities. If you reduce vulnerabilities, then exclusions are reverted. It may not necessarily mean that inclusion comes about, but I think the agitation within Pakistan for including marginalized groups, marginalized cohorts into the mainstream has had a long-standing history, 7 decades in the making. The state has sometimes assisted this, sometimes the state has not assisted this as much. But there are many, many cases that come to mind where the state has actually put in a case on the side of the citizen. So as we sort of move into this, as we transition past creating new entitlements, such as digital rights, such as environmental rights for our citizens, Pakistan is actually on the right side of history, can I say? it is on the wrong side of history on a great many things. Our security apparatus, the workings of the state are still very, very, can I say, pre-modern. The way agitations happen on our streets sometimes outpace the ability of the states or duty bearers to listen to what citizens are saying, to appreciate, to be able to absorb, to be able to turn what they are saying into policy formulas. And that is the case all over the world. We must also realize that regions that are as transitional as South Asia, perhaps these agitations will never end. It is we have fundamentally a large youthful population that is hyper inventing itself with with the internet and with new sort of pressures that they face every day, with integration into an economy that asks for new skills, with new kinds of migrations that are bringing modernity as well as new psychological challenges. Now, has anybody kept up to all of tabs on all of this? I don't think anybody can, and certainly not the Pakistani state. While the Pakistani state may not have kept up with how citizens reinvent their realities, or even make good on their asks, their contemporary demands for policy change, the state may not be as antagonistic to their persuasions as other countries. Now, this might seem like the bare minimum, but in countries like Pakistan that have undergone violence and conflict, and still continue to be involved in new strategic alliances, etc., the state emerges as an entity not antagonistic to its own citizens, as other entities in this region have.
I think that's a very important point that you've raised, that the state in Pakistan is such a complex issue. It's such a complex beast that seeing what we see in the news constantly, being bombarded with negative news and failures of the government, that isn't really the overall aim. And we do see the state working towards a goal which is generally, on the whole, I think a positive angle that it's going towards. So Salman, moving on, I wanted to look at and discuss with you what between Pakistan and India. The past year we've seen 5th August happening, the Domicile Act being passed, Indians from outside Jammu and Kashmir being brought in, encouraged to be brought in, and then along with that, a lot of other developments happening within India. How do we go forward? How does Pakistan go forward from this particular position now?
There's been a lot of thinking in Islamabad on how Pakistan moves forward. We've made a number of moves. And of course, at the heart of this comes the Kashmir issue. And the Kashmir issue is not a territory issue for us, as it is for the Indians. For us, it is about the people. And our advocacy at international forums, including the UN Security Council, has been about how human rights abuses need to be reduced, how the lockdown needs to be taken down, how internet, other things need to come back. There is a degree of acceptance that India may not go back to Article 370, which was again a provisional kind of law that came into place. Certainly not under the BJP government of Mr. Modi, that has an agenda which seems to have permeated their foreign policy and national security establishment to such a degree that things seem irreversible to a large extent. India is not a country that we recognize anymore. And here I say this because at the Track 2 level, we have dealt with India and the many iterations of India under its governments. There was wisdom, there was clarity, there was a great deal of complementarity in much of what we did. We shared a common vision on South Asia. But this was, of course, now predates Mr. Modi. There are common issues that the region has. Um, but there is certainly no bandwidth for dialogue anymore. In Pakistan, the view is very prejudiced towards India, and the Indians, of course, have been giving us this message for many years. Now, Pakistan's moves have been to create a diplomatic bandwidth for peace, and that extends on both sides of our border. In Kabul, we made that move. In India, we made that move repeatedly, just so that if we are able to create an agenda, and creating an agenda is a vexed process. It comes in a very, like in a pressure cooker environment.
No, absolutely, yeah.
And it does not come easy. You have to look past your troubles. You have to look past the violence on the LOC. You have to look past Uri and Balakot and Pathankot, all of those incidents which the Indians keep throwing at us, to still be able to create an idiom for peace and create options for the people of Kashmir. I find that is something that Islamabad has stuck to, and we must stick to. Because whatever happens, it's foreign policy can get very caught up in a privileged story or in an ego story.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where New Delhi is stuck in an ego posture that doesn't seem to change. When you speak to interlocutors, when you speak to their diplomats, when you're confronted by things like, we've had a clash in Ladakh, we will expel your diplomats. Things like this, which don't really add up, but you can understand the pattern of dealing with, frankly, a very peevish attitude. This is not diplomacy. This is a very, I don't want to get all cynical about it and use other adjectives, but this is something that we confronted with Kabul as well.
Mm-hmm.
The personality of the premier permeates how diplomats engage, and it is not helpful. So, and it shows Pakistan's maturity here as an actor that is looking for stability. We have engaged an interlocutor in Kabul as well, to be able to shore up diplomatic goodwill. We don't have the same opportunity in India. We used to have a back channel. We used to have many more things going. But we don't have that opportunity. Coming back to your question, how do we move forward? Perhaps applying multilateral pressure. That's one way to do it. And we have consistently done it. They do respond. It's not like the Indians are not, they, for a power that presents itself as, a new kind of, a nuclear power sending spaceships abroad, etc. They are very thin-skinned when it comes to diplomacy.
That's something we've certainly noted, especially over the last year or two. So I think you've given a lot for us and the viewers especially to digest on this issue. I wanted to move on to the issue of climate change, and I know we've discussed it very briefly before, but again, within the context of India and Pakistan, one issue and something that has something of deep concern for people in international law is the Indus Water Treaty, and rather the fragility of its mechanisms for dispute resolution and whatnot. Where do you see the future of the Indus Water Treaty and water disputes between India and Pakistan, which are so critical to not only our relations but to our people domestically in both countries?
The future is not a great one, and that's simply because India and Pakistan collect data internally very badly on their water, on their river systems, etc. On the basin itself. That debate has actually become a casualty of the larger Indo-Pak relationship. So I'm not terribly keen on looking out for where the treaty goes. The treaty is not in crisis. It has held, throughout decades of conflict. But India and Pakistan's ability to manage their water is certainly a space for watching with anticipation and some fear. We collect water badly. We collect our data badly on our rivers. Water science.
We also collect our water badly.
For sure. And you were making a push for large infrastructure projects, damming, etc. The jury is still out there, and whether this will actually benefit Pakistan. The net benefit is sometimes outweighs the net cost outweighs the benefit. Pakistan needs to create an integrated water management system to begin with.
Absolutely.
To be able to reduce vulnerabilities, to be able to, and say again, coming back to the criteria of what looks like a good build-up. If you can reduce vulnerability here, For example, women who are working in fisheries in Karachi or Sindh, will they benefit? Will transgenders in the heart of our provinces, who are a marginalized group, have more access to drinking water?
No,
I
absolutely.
bring these groups up as examples of where vulnerability lies.
Absolutely.
And policies cannot be divorced. Policies sometimes operate in this overhang of this very, very divorced reality that does not have any popular ingress. But when policies have to fundamentally respond to vulnerabilities on ground, unfortunately, our climate debate is stuck in some administrative or technical jargon. And I'll give you one example of it. When we constantly refer to the billion tree tsunami, we are unable to see, very, literally unable to see the woods from the trees. The woods of climate change do not mean that you grow 10 billion trees. The cost of that large infrastructure project may all be very well, but is that the first place to look? Pakistan's first problem is water availability.
Absolutely.
We are not looking at the basin. When we speak of the basin, we start talking about the Indus Water Treaty, which is we don't have a function or mechanism to speak to the Indians. We do have one actually under the treaty, but it's not being utilized. So we must use the vicarious, the longer route, the attracting international attention. While that may not happen because the World Bank has said we're not going to intervene in this dynamic. Yeah. You then start speaking to Afghanistan, with whom we don't have a treaty on the Kabul River. They are also part of the basin. You start talking to China, who is part of the basin. In Pakistan, again, we need to have much better science. Bring the hydrology experts, bring the water scientists together and ask them what the problems are. And these problems are not very well known to our legislators.
So, Salman, what are some of the issues? Is it because, whatever policy we do have is too fractured, is too divided amongst all, or is it because, our decision-making is too compartmentalized, too bureaucratic, all of the above?
All of the above. The Federation is looking at climate change and going ahead with a tree project. In the provinces, those mandates and policy chains don't fully apply because there is no Ministry of Climate Change. There is Ministry of Environment that carries that mandate.
Absolutely, yeah.
And lower down, as you go down the policy change, implementation metrics differ, capacities differ, budgeting differs. Like I mentioned earlier, Pakistan is not very good at even budgeting its projects. Any evaluation of those projects, you look at all four provinces and then GB and AJK, you really have to scratch your head and ask, who did this? Is there a central coordination mechanism? There isn't.
Yeah.
Right? But that doesn't mean that we cannot redo this pattern. We can. And the Council of Common Interest, so other forums are there for exactly this reason, right? That you resolve national problems there. And those forums aren't being utilized. Unfortunately, it is the Federation that triggers this dialogic kind of or creates or preserves this pattern.
But at the federal level, do we not see climate change being a priority? Or is it that they've made it a priority, but they lack the sophistication in expressing that through the entire federation to the provinces and to the subordinate units within the country to be able to come up with a cohesive formula to solve a lot of these issues?
So I don't want to suggest that there is no sophistication at the federal level. There is sophistication. People who are dealing with it, and thankfully we're sort of finally in a phase where we are giving this very important issue its attention on the highest level.
Okay.
But what I meant to say is that you have to connect pressures on ground with the policy prescriptions that you make.
Okay.
Does Pakistan have a good reading of vulnerability? Does it have enough evidence from ground? Who is it looking for? Who is it willing to empower? Who is it willing to benefit? Unfortunately, across the world, climate change action triggered by federal governments everywhere is stuck in administrative terms. When you talk science, then you are talking about large open spaces, the glacial melt, etc. You have to be able to connect it with people, because people bear the brunt of climate change. It's not our buildings, it's not the trees out there, it's not the billion tree tsunami, it's not our cars. It is our marginalized cohorts.
Salman, thank you so much. I think we've had a great discussion, not only on constructing foreign policy and national security policy, but also looking at climate change and policy that's developed there. But just to round it off, just to give it some closure. How do we have policies that have people as the center, and people focused, people-centric policies being developed in a place like Pakistan?
That's an interesting question. I feel that policy is never really in crisis. It is people who live through the consequence of policies, whether they go wrong or right. And sometimes they result in violence and conflict and frustration, which expresses itself in many ways. But I feel for states, it is very important to be able to reinvent themselves and keep up with the times. And the major asks of our age are how rights, not fundamental ones, but emerging ones,
Mm-hmm.
will be incorporated in our contemporary reality. This is a question that many states are unable to answer. But these are answers that we must devise. These are questions we must devise answers to ourselves. Our people are resilient, as they have demonstrated over and over again. But resilience turns to frustration very soon if there is nothing in the offing.
Mm-hmm.
And while there are emerging realities, Pakistan does need to make good on the fundamentals of its constitution. That is, to empower citizens by giving them material advantage. Pakistan needs to make good on providing food security, jobs, livelihoods. That is the basic requirement of states. Reversing exclusions and finding effective ways to do so, is a contemporary challenge. Pakistan has not done a very good job of including its cohorts. In fact, our constitutional amendments have relegated certain cohorts of the population to the side. And those exclusions have become entrenched over time. I think as Pakistan goes forward in its policy prescriptions and its frameworking of how to provide for the people of Pakistan, it has to take a very long, hard look at how inclusion can be implemented, how it can be programmed. Also, going forward, I think the resilience of the people of Pakistan can be banked on.
Mm-hmm.
This is a country with a large youthful population that is talented and diverse and able to equip and resource itself. And that is a strength that societies in transition or societies with such levels of poverty exist. This is a country that can reinvent itself and offer more and more to the world, other than potential. We have things to offer, which sometimes the state does not build into its programming.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be cognizant of this talent and diversity and resourcefulness. Going forward, also, I find that we have to move away from things like providing HDI. And the HDI is not provided, of course. The HDI comes about in a particular way. But also looking at new metrics of human consequence. How far can our citizens go
Mm-hmm.
if they are given so little? Right? We cannot undo the 25 million kids out of school, the sort of through the whole COVID response, the social protections that we offer or the social welfare that we offer can all become medium-term, projects, if you like, if we don't look at long-term human consequence outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where states need to move, and Pakistan is certainly no different. When we have opportunities, like we mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, where we have those opportunities going for us, then perhaps the state needs to move forward into areas that will give dividends for the next 20 years.
Salman Zaidi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.